The people we overlook often carry the heaviest burdens, and sometimes the greatest secret in the room is not hidden behind a locked door, but behind a mother's quiet smile. Sunrise spilled across the Romano estate, turning its white marble walls into glowing gold while rows of black SUVs lined the circular driveway like silent guardians. Inside the mansion, polished floors reflected crystal chandeliers, antique paintings watched from every wall, and dozens of staff members hurried through another carefully orchestrated morning. Nothing was ever allowed to happen by accident inside Dominic Romano's home. Every meal arrived on time. Every room remained flawless. Every employee understood one rule above all others: never bring your personal life into the estate. Yet on this particular morning, that rule would shatter in a way no one could have imagined. It began with a scream from the East Wing. One of the housekeepers dropped a basket of fresh linens as a young mother cried out in panic. 3-year-old Sofia Romano, Dominic's beloved niece, had vanished from the breakfast room only moments after chasing a toy rabbit down the hallway. Within seconds, the mansion transformed from peaceful luxury into controlled chaos. Security officers checked every entrance. Gardeners searched the sprawling ground stretching nearly 20 acres. Drivers inspected every vehicle waiting beyond the iron gates. Even the kitchen staff abandoned their stations as fear spread through the estate faster than wildfire. Dominic Romano descended the grand staircase without raising his voice. At 6'3", dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit despite the early hour, he carried the kind of calm that made everyone else immediately stand still. His dark eye scanned the frightened faces around him, measuring every reaction without wasting a single word. Nobody dared speak until he finally asked one question. When was she last seen? The silence that followed felt heavier than stone before Sofia's mother answered through trembling breaths. Less than 5 minutes ago. Dominic nodded once. Lock every gate. Nobody leaves until she's found. No shouting. No threats. Just quiet. Authority that sent everyone moving instantly. Cameras from every hallway appeared on monitors inside the security office. Staff members replayed each angle repeatedly, but Sofia seemed to disappear between 2 corridors as though the mansion itself had swallowed her whole. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, the head housekeeper, quietly counted every employee standing in the entrance hall. Everyone was present except one. Ava Brooks. The newest maid had been working at the estate for only 4 months. Reliable. Invisible. Always early. Always the last to leave. Yet this morning, no one knew where she was. Dominic noticed the hesitation on Mrs. Hayes' face before she even spoke. Sir. Ava hasn't checked in. His expression never changed. Find her. Minutes later, one of the gardeners paused near the old storage level beneath the greenhouse after hearing something impossible. A gentle lullaby floated through the narrow hallway, soft and comforting, almost completely hidden beneath the distant voices searching above. It wasn't fear that stopped him. It was confusion. No one was supposed to be down there. He slowly opened the aging wooden door. Inside the dim room illuminated only by a small basement window, Ava Brooks sat on an old blanket with little Sofia asleep peacefully against her shoulder. Relief flooded the gardener's face for only a heartbeat before his eye shifted to the child sitting quietly beside Ava. A little girl with curly hair, worn sneakers, and a faded yellow sweater clutched a stuffed rabbit against her chest. She couldn't have been older than 5. She looked up with frightened brown eyes, instinctively reaching for Ava's hand. The mansion searched desperately for one missing child, but hidden beneath its foundation had been another child no one even knew existed. Ava Brooks did not try to run. She did not invent excuses or hide behind desperate words. She simply tightened the small blanket around both children and slowly rose to her feet as footsteps echoed through the narrow hallway. Sofia stirred for a moment before opening sleepy blue eyes and smiling as though nothing unusual had happened. She was scared, Ava said softly, her voice carrying. No panic, only exhaustion. She heard everyone shouting upstairs and started crying. I did not want her to become more frightened. The little girl reached toward Dominic the moment he entered the room, stretching out her tiny arms with complete trust. Without hesitation, he lifted Sophia into his embrace, carefully brushing a strand of blonde hair away from her face. She rested her head against his shoulder and whispered. Miss Ava sang the bird song. I like the bird song. Dominic looked at Ava for a long, silent moment before his attention shifted toward the other child. The little girl remained perfectly still, clutching her stuffed rabbit so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. She hid partly behind Ava's leg, peeking cautiously around the worn fabric of the maid's uniform. Her sweater had been washed so many times that the yellow had almost faded into cream, and the toes of her small sneakers showed tiny signs of careful stitching done by hand. Nothing about her suggested neglect. Everything about her suggested sacrifice. Who is she? Dominic finally asked. His voice remained calm, but every employee standing behind him felt the weight of the question. Ava lowered her eyes for only a second before meeting his gaze again. Her name is Lily. She paused, taking a slow breath that seemed to carry months of fear. She is my daughter. The room became so quiet that even the humming air conditioner sounded loud. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes covered her mouth in disbelief. Two security officers exchanged confused glances. None of them had ever seen a child anywhere near the employee quarters, let alone inside the Romano estate. Dominic did not interrupt. He simply waited. Ava gently rested one hand on Lily's shoulder. Please say hello. Lily looked up with innocent uncertainty. Good morning, sir, she whispered politely, her tiny voice almost disappearing inside the large storage room. Dominic noticed something else immediately. Beside an old wooden shelf sat a neatly folded sleeping mat, a stack of children's library books, several colored pencils worn down from careful use, and a pair of small rain boots lined up perfectly against the wall. This had not been a hiding place for one night. Someone had quietly built a little world inside a forgotten corner of the mansion. Mrs. Hayes finally found her voice. Ava, how long has she been here? Ava answered without hesitation because there was no longer any reason to protect the secret with silence. Almost for months. Audible gasps filled the room. For months. For months of breakfast served in the grand dining room while another child quietly ate oatmeal downstairs. For months of birthday parties, formal dinners, charity galas, and business meetings, all while a little girl lived only a few hundred feet away without anyone knowing she existed. Dominic slowly surveyed the modest room once more. Every blanket had been folded with care. Every toy had been repaired instead of replaced. A tiny calendar on the wall showed letters written in careful handwriting, each day marked with reading lessons and simple math practice. Someone had been teaching Lily every evening after work. Nothing suggested deception for personal gain. Everything suggested a mother doing everything she could to preserve a childhood with almost nothing. Dominic looked back at Ava, and for the first time since entering the room, he asked a question that surprised everyone present. Does anyone else know she is here? For several long seconds, Ava did not answer. Her fingers gently brushed Lily's curls while the little girl leaned quietly against her side, finding comfort in the only person she had ever been able to depend on. Finally, Ava lifted her eyes and spoke with complete honesty. No, sir. Nobody else knows. Mrs. Hayes hired me because I said I could work any schedule, any holiday, any overnight shift. If they had known I was raising a little girl by myself, I never would have been offered the job. No one challenged her? Deep inside, everyone understood there was painful truth in those words. Dominic remained perfectly still. Explain everything. Ava nodded once. After my husband passed away 3 years ago, I lost our apartment 6 months later. I worked every job I could find, but every interview ended the same way. The moment employers learned I had a young daughter, they chose someone else. They always smiled politely. They always thanked me for coming. Then they never called. Lily lowered her head as though she had heard the story too many times before. Ava continued quietly. When I applied here, I left that part out. I hated lying, but I loved my daughter more than my pride. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes looked down at the floor, remembering the interview. Ava had arrived wearing a neatly pressed thrift store dress with a folder of glowing references and calm confidence. She had never complained. Never negotiated her salary. Never requested weekends off. She had simply asked for a chance to work. Dominic listened without interrupting. Ava drew a slow breath before revealing the routine that had become her entire life. Every morning she woke before 4 o'clock. She prepared breakfast for Lily using a small electric kettle and a hot plate she kept hidden inside an old cabinet. Before the rest of the household awakened, she tucked Lily safely inside the unused storage room with books borrowed from the local library and simple learning activities she created by hand. During her breaks, Ava quietly brought fruit, sandwiches, or soup downstairs without ever taking more than her assigned staff meals. Every evening after finishing 12-hour shifts, she taught Lily to read, write, count, and dream before they both fell asleep only a few feet from shelves filled with forgotten furniture. Weekends were their favorite because the mansion became quieter, and Lily could peek through the tiny basement window to watch butterflies cross the garden she had never been allowed to enter. She never complained, Ava whispered with a faint smile that somehow made the room even sadder. She thought every little girl grew up living beside boxes. Dominic's eyes slowly wandered across the storage room again. He noticed drawings taped carefully to the wall. One showed a bright yellow house with flowers in front. Another showed a woman holding hands with a little girl beneath a smiling sun. In every picture, there was an empty space beside them where another person might have stood someday. He also noticed something else. Every crayon had been sharpened with remarkable care. Every page had been preserved instead of thrown away. Every possession reflected gratitude rather than scarcity. Lily suddenly looked up at Dominic with innocent curiosity. "Mister, am I in trouble because I stayed quiet?" Her small voice broke whatever emotional distance remained in the room. Dominic looked directly into her frightened eyes before answering in a tone far gentler than anyone present had ever heard from him. "No, sweetheart." He paused for only a heartbeat. "You answered every question honestly." Lily seemed relieved, but Ava closed her eyes for a brief moment, overwhelmed by the kindness hidden inside such a simple sentence. Yet while compassion quietly settled over the forgotten room beneath the greenhouse, another storm had already begun forming upstairs, because word of the hidden child was spreading through the Romano family, and not everyone believed kindness belonged inside a house built on discipline, order, and unbreakable rules. By late afternoon, the Romano family had gathered inside the mansion's private sitting room, where sunlight filtered through towering windows and settled across polished walnut floors. The atmosphere was unusually tense. News traveled quickly inside the estate, and every version of the story seemed more unbelievable than the last. Victoria Romano paced slowly beside the fireplace, her tailored cream suit as flawless as her carefully controlled expression. She stopped only long enough to look directly at her brother. She deceived everyone for 4 months. Dominic remained seated, his hands resting calmly on the leather chair. He did not respond. Their mother, Evelyn Romano, quietly stirred her tea without taking a sip. At 72, she had learned that silence often revealed more than arguments ever could. Victoria continued. "This is not about compassion. It is about trust." She broke the rules the moment she walked through our front gate. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes stood respectfully near the doorway, her heart growing heavier with every word. She had supervised hundreds of employees over the years, yet none had worked with Ava's consistency. She remembered winter mornings when Ava arrived before sunrise, despite snow covering the long driveway. She remembered evenings when the younger woman volunteered to clean extra rooms after charity events without asking for overtime. Never once had she complained. Never once had she requested special treatment. Dominic finally spoke. "Did she ever fail her work?" Mrs. Hayes answered immediately. "No, sir." "Did anything disappear from this house?" "Never." "Did anyone question her character before today?" Mrs. Hayes slowly shook her head. "No, sir." Victoria folded her arms. "That does not erase what she did." Dominic looked toward the enormous windows overlooking the gardens where children from neighboring families often played during weekend gatherings. No, he answered quietly. It does not. The room fell silent once more. Upstairs, Ava sat alone inside a small guest room where Mrs. Hayes had asked her to wait with Lily until a decision was made. For the first time in months, Lily sat beside a real bedroom window. She stared outside with wide eyes as birds landed near a stone fountain. "Mom," she whispered, "are we allowed to look outside now?" Ava forced a gentle smile. "Just for today, sweetheart." Lily nodded happily, completely unaware that her future depended on conversations happening only a few rooms away. She pressed her tiny hand against the glass with quiet wonder. "The flowers are even prettier up close." Ava looked away before tears could reach her eyes. She had spent every waking hour protecting Lily from fear, yet she could not protect her from disappointment if they were forced to leave. Downstairs, Dominic asked for security records covering the previous 4 months. Within minutes, dozens of video clips appeared across the large monitor in his office. The recordings revealed a pattern so ordinary that it became extraordinary. Every morning before dawn, Ava entered the kitchen carrying an empty lunch container and quietly left with only food already assigned to the staff. Every evening after everyone else had gone home, she returned unused crayons from children's charity events to a small paper bag instead of throwing them away. One clip showed her carefully repairing a broken stuffed rabbit with needle and thread during her 15-minute break. Another showed her smiling at a cashier while purchasing children's cough medicine after finishing an overnight shift. She never spent money on herself. She never lingered. She simply worked, saved, and hurried home, even though home had been hidden beneath the same roof all along. Dominic watched every recording without speaking. When the final video ended, he leaned back slowly. The evidence before him told a story no accusation could erase. Ava Brooks had hidden one truth, but every single day she had quietly demonstrated 100 others. And for the first time since discovering Lily, Dominic found himself asking not whether the maid deserved punishment, but whether everyone else had failed to see the extraordinary strength standing quietly in front of them all along. As evening settled over the Romano estate, golden light faded behind the tall oak trees, leaving the mansion wrapped in a quiet stillness that felt almost ceremonial. Every member of the household understood that a decision was coming, and every conversation ended the moment Dominic Romano walked into the formal family dining room. The long walnut table, usually reserved for holidays and important announcements, had been prepared without a single plate of food. Tonight, no one had gathered to celebrate. They had gathered to judge. Ava entered several minutes later, her hands folded calmly in front of her despite the fear pressing against her heart. Lily stood beside her, holding the repaired stuffed rabbit with both hands. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes quietly led them to the far end of the room before stepping back. Victoria Romano broke the silence first. "Do you understand the position you placed this family in?" Ava nodded respectfully. "Yes, ma'am." "Do you understand that hiding another person inside this estate violated every employment agreement you signed?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then why should anyone here believe another word you say?" Ava looked down at Lily before answering. "Because everything else I told you was true." The simplicity of her answer lingered in the room. She did not defend herself. She did not blame anyone. She simply stood beside her daughter as though nothing else mattered. Evelyn Romano quietly observed the little girl, who seemed far more interested in counting the crystal lights hanging from the chandelier than listening to the adults around her. The innocence on Lily's face made the conversation feel strangely unbalanced. Victoria slid a folder across the polished table. "You signed paperwork confirming that you had no dependents living with you during employment." Ava nodded once more. "I did." That statement was false. "Yes." "Why?" Ava slowly inhaled before speaking. "Because I had already heard the answer too many times." Everyone looked toward her. Every interview ended the moment employers learned I was raising a child alone. They never said my daughter was the problem. They simply chose someone else. After nearly a year of hearing, "We will call you," I stopped believing anyone would. Her voice never rose above a gentle calm. I knew lying was wrong. I also knew my daughter needed food more than I needed to feel innocent. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but Dominic quietly lifted one hand. She immediately fell silent. He turned toward Ava. Did you ever intend to tell us? Ava answered without hesitation. Every day. Confusion crossed several faces. She continued softly. Every morning I promised myself that today would be the day. Then I imagined losing this job, and I looked at Lily eating breakfast with a smile because she believed everything would be all right. I could never bring myself to take that smile away. The room became still again. Lily gently tugged on Ava's sleeve. Mom. Ava looked down. Yes, sweetheart. Lily whispered with complete sincerity, did I make everyone sad? Ava immediately knelt beside her. No, baby. None of this is your fault. Before anyone else could speak, Lily carefully walked toward the center of the room carrying her stuffed rabbit. She stopped a few feet from Dominic and looked up with innocent courage. I tried to stay very quiet. Mommy said we were only borrowing a little corner until life got better. Her small words landed with more weight than any argument spoken that evening. Dominic looked at the child for several silent moments before lowering his eyes to the worn rabbit in her arms, noticing careful stitches holding one ear together. He recognized the same patient repairs he had seen in the security footage. In that quiet instant, he understood something that no report, contract, or rule could ever fully explain. Every secret Ava had kept had been built from fear, but every choice she made afterward had been built from love. And for the first time since the truth had come to light, the question inside Dominic's mind was no longer whether Ava Brooks deserved to remain in his home, but whether his home deserved someone like Ava Brooks. No one spoke after Lily's words. The silence that settled over the dining room carried more weight than any accusation had moments before. Dominic Romano slowly rose from his chair and walked toward the enormous windows overlooking the estate. The garden stretched across the property in perfect symmetry, every hedge trimmed with precision, every fountain polished until it reflected the fading evening sky. Everything in his world had always been controlled. Everything except the memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Without turning around, he asked quietly, Lily, how old are you? 5, sir, she answered politely. Do you know why your mommy told you to stay hidden? Lily nodded with innocent certainty. Because monsters only hurt grown-ups if children stay quiet. The room froze. Ava immediately knelt beside her daughter, gently brushing a hand across her cheek. Sweetheart, that is enough. But Lily looked confused. Did I say something wrong? Ava forced a trembling smile. No, baby. You told the truth. Dominic closed his eyes for a brief moment. Those simple words reached somewhere he had spent years trying to bury. He remembered another frightened child decades earlier, sitting alone in a tiny apartment while his exhausted grandmother worked double shifts cleaning office buildings after dark. He remembered pretending not to be hungry because there was only enough soup for one bowl. He remembered hearing adults whisper that poor families simply had to be stronger than everyone else. For years he had believed success meant never feeling powerless again. Yet standing only a few feet away was a woman who had lived through that same fear without wealth, influence, or protection, carrying it completely alone. He slowly turned back toward Ava. How many nights did Lily sleep in that storage room? Ava answered honestly. 119. Several people around the table lowered their eyes. Dominic asked another question. How many times did she ask why she could not play outside? Ava swallowed before replying. Almost every day. Lily quietly interrupted with the gentle honesty only children possess. Mommy promised we would have our own little apartment someday. She said windows are worth waiting for. Evelyn Romano removed her glasses and discreetly wiped away a tear before anyone noticed. Victoria looked toward the child but remained silent for the first time all evening. Dominic walked closer until he stood directly in front of Lily. His voice softened in a way that surprised even himself. Did your mommy ever stop smiling around you? Lily smiled proudly. Never. even when she was tired. Dominic looked at Ava. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. Tiny scars marked her hands from years of hard work. Her shoes had been repaired more than once instead of replaced. Yet she had somehow managed to protect Lily's belief that tomorrow would always be better than today. He finally understood that courage did not always look like strength. Sometimes courage looked like waking up at 4 o'clock every morning, working 12-hour shifts, teaching a child by flashlight, and still finding enough hope to sing lullabies before bedtime. Dominic drew a slow breath. Mrs. Hayes. Yes, sir. Prepare the East guest suite. Confusion swept across the room. Mrs. Hayes blinked. So? Dominic never looked away from Ava and Lily. The room with the garden view. Victoria stepped forward in disbelief. Dominic, surely you are not suggesting. He calmly interrupted her. No child in this house will ever sleep beside storage boxes again. The word settled over everyone like the final note of a song. Ava stared at him, unable to speak. Tears finally escaped despite every effort to remain composed. Lily looked up at her mother with hopeful eyes that had no idea her entire world had just begun to change. The East guest suite had remained untouched for nearly 2 years. Fresh flowers appeared every Monday, the windows were cleaned every week, and the fireplace was polished before every holiday, yet no one had slept there since Dominic's late uncle passed away. That evening, for the first time in years, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes opened the double doors and invited Ava and Lily inside. Warm lamplight filled the room. Soft ivory curtains moved gently with the evening breeze. A handmade quilt rested across a queen-sized bed while a smaller bed had quietly been prepared beside the window. Lily stood completely still. She looked at the room as though she had stepped into one of the fairy tales her mother borrowed from the public library. Slowly she walked toward the window and placed both hands against the cool glass. Beyond the gardens, hundreds of tiny lights glowed along the walking paths. "Mom," she whispered with amazement, "the flowers look even prettier at night." Ava could not answer. She simply covered her mouth as tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Mrs. Hayes pretended not to notice. Instead, she knelt beside Lily and smiled warmly. "Would you like to see your closet?" Lily nodded. When the doors opened, she gasped. Inside hung several simple dresses, pajamas, socks, sneakers, and a small yellow raincoat. Nothing extravagant. Everything chosen with care. "Are these ours?" Lily asked. Mrs. Hayes smiled. "Yes, sweetheart." Lily immediately turned toward Ava. "Can we really keep them?" Ava hugged her tightly. "I think so." Across the mansion, Dominic sat alone inside his study. Business reports remained unopened across his desk while a single photograph rested in his hands. It showed his grandmother standing beside a tiny apartment building, wearing the same tired smile he had seen on Ava's face only hours earlier. She had spent her life cleaning other people's homes so her grandson could someday build his own future. He realized something that unsettled him deeply. If life had unfolded only a little differently, his grandmother could have been standing exactly where Ava stood now, hoping someone powerful would choose mercy instead of judgment. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Evelyn entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. She placed one beside him before sitting across the desk. "You were thinking about your grandmother?" Dominic looked up with quiet surprise. "How did you know?" Evelyn smiled gently. "Because I was thinking about her too." Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. "Money protects comfort, Dominic. It does not always protect compassion. That choice still belongs to people." Dominic slowly nodded. "I nearly judged Ava by one mistake." Evelyn looked toward the family photograph resting on the bookshelf. "No. You nearly judged her before understanding her story. There is a difference." Meanwhile, Lily wandered carefully through the guest suite, touching the books arranged neatly on a small shelf. One title caught her attention. She opened it carefully before running back to her mother. Mom, can we read tonight without the flashlight? Ava smiled through fresh tears. Yes, sweetheart. Does that mean nobody has to whisper anymore? Ava closed the book for a moment and gently kissed Lily's forehead. No, baby. We do not have to whisper anymore. Outside the partially open door, Mrs. Hayes quietly wiped away a tear before continuing down the hallway. For months she had admired Ava's work ethic. Only now did she fully understand the quiet strength hidden behind every early morning, every extra shift, and every gentle smile. Throughout the mansion, the staff began speaking about the events of the day. Yet the conversation had already changed. No one spoke about deception anymore. They spoke about sacrifice, dignity, and a little girl who had spent 119 nights believing that even a small window was something worth dreaming about. The following morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the breakfast room, filling the Romano mansion with a warmth that felt different from every morning before it. Word of Dominic's decision had reached every employee overnight, and although no one spoke openly about it, kindness quietly replaced curiosity. As Ava walked into the kitchen, several members of the staff greeted her with gentle smiles instead of uncertain glances. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes handed her a fresh apron before softly saying, "Welcome back." Ava accepted it with grateful eyes. "Thank you." Before she could begin preparing the morning trays, Dominic entered the room. Every conversation immediately stopped. He looked around the kitchen before addressing everyone with calm authority. Effective today, there will be one change inside this house. Every employee listened carefully. Children will never again be treated as burdens because of their parents' circumstances. If any member of this staff ever needs temporary family assistance, they will speak directly with Mrs. Hayes. We solve problems in this house. We do not hide from them. Several employees exchanged surprised looks. One elderly gardener quietly lowered his head, clearly moved by the announcement. Dominic continued, "Compassion is not weakness. It is responsibility." Upstairs, Lily sat beside the large window reading aloud from one of the books she had discovered the night before. She stumbled over a difficult word before laughing softly at herself. A gentle knock sounded at the open door. Evelyn Romano stepped inside carrying a wicker basket. "May I come in?" Lily smiled brightly. "Yes, m." Evelyn placed the basket on the bed. Inside were colored pencils, drawing paper, and a brand new storybook about birds. Lily looked at the gifts with wide eyes. "Are these really for me?" Evelyn nodded. Every child deserves something that belongs only to them. Lily carefully hugged the basket instead of opening it immediately, as though she was afraid it might disappear if she moved too quickly. Downstairs, Victoria Romano watched everything unfold in thoughtful silence. She had spent the entire night convinced Dominic had acted emotionally instead of rationally. Yet as she observed Ava returning to work with the same quiet professionalism she had always shown, and noticed Lily politely thanking every employee she met, something inside her certainty began to soften. Later that afternoon, she passed the library and noticed Lily sitting on the floor. Beside a bookshelf, carefully placing every book back exactly where she had found it. "You do not have to organize those," Victoria said. Lily looked up with an innocent smile. "Mommy says we always leave places better than we found them." Victoria stood motionless for several seconds. There was no rehearsed politeness in the child's voice. It was simply the lesson she had grown up believing. That evening, Dominic gathered his family once more in the sitting room. Without drama or ceremony, he placed a folder on the coffee table. "I have updated Ava Brooks's employment agreement." Victoria looked down at the document. Ava would no longer serve as a temporary housekeeper. She would become the estate's full-time household operations coordinator with increased salary, health benefits, and a private apartment on the property until she chose to move into a home of her own. Another page established an education fund in Lily's name, ensuring every future school expense would be covered. Victoria slowly closed the folder before looking at her brother. "You planned all of this already?" Dominic answered quietly. No child should lose opportunities because a parent chose honesty too late after surviving impossible choices for too long. No one argued. This time, the silence inside the Romano mansion was not filled with judgment. It was filled with understanding. 6 months passed, and the Romano estate no longer felt like a place where silence was built from fear. It had become a home where quiet often carried laughter instead. Spring covered the gardens with roses and fresh green leaves, and every Saturday morning one small figure could be seen racing carefully along the stone paths with a storybook tucked beneath her arm. Lily Brooks had started first grade at one of the city's best elementary schools. Every afternoon she returned wearing a neatly pressed uniform and carrying new drawings, spelling quizzes, and stories about classmates who had quickly become her friends. She no longer looked at windows as though they were impossible dreams. She simply opened them to let fresh air into her room. Ava still arrived before sunrise, not because she was expected to, but because she believed caring for the Romano estate was now an honor instead of a burden. As household operations coordinator, she guided new employees with the same patience she had once wished someone would have shown her. Whenever she interviewed applicants, she always asked one question before discussing experience. Is there anything happening in your life that we should understand so we can help you succeed? More than once, frightened parents admitted they had been hiding family struggles, expecting rejection. Instead, they found understanding. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes often smiled quietly from across the room, knowing the culture of the entire household had changed because one woman had chosen honesty after carrying fear for far too long. Victoria Romano changed as well, although she rarely spoke about it. One afternoon she surprised Lily with a small wooden birdhouse they assembled together beneath the old maple tree near the fountain. As they painted it bright blue, Lily looked up and asked, "Do birds ever get scared?" Victoria smiled softly before answering, "Sometimes. But they still build their nests anyway." Lily nodded as though she understood something much bigger than the conversation itself. Evelyn Romano continued reading with Lily every Sunday afternoon in the library. They had already finished dozens of children's novels, and every completed book earned another handwritten star on a framed chart hanging beside the fireplace. Dominic occasionally paused outside the library doors just long enough to hear Lily confidently reading aloud, remembering the little girl who once believed whispering was the safest way to live. One warm evening the entire household gathered in the garden for a simple outdoor dinner celebrating Lily's excellent school report. There were no grand speeches, no expensive decorations, only homemade food, fresh flowers, and genuine smiles shared around one long table. After dessert, Lily carefully walked toward Dominic carrying a folded piece of construction paper decorated with colored hearts and tiny birds. "This is for you," she said. Dominic unfolded the card slowly. Inside, written in careful first-grade handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for giving us a home with windows." For the first time in many years, Dominic found himself unable to answer immediately. He simply looked at the drawing of two small figures standing beside a large house, sunlight shining through every window. Ava watched quietly from across the table, tears filling her eyes once again, but this time they came from gratitude instead of fear. Dominic finally smiled and placed the drawing beside his heart before looking around at the people gathered together. The mansion had not become stronger because of its walls, its wealth, or its reputation. It had become stronger because compassion had been allowed to enter through a door that rules alone could never open. And on that day, everyone inside the Romano estate remembered what true dignity looks like.